Alright, so once again, I'm out here in Santa Monica, as you guys can see, just watching the sunset on the beach. And you guys know, when I sit down on this sand like this, I'm about to go into some serious reflection. And an idea that's really been ruminating in my mind for the better part of the last year, maybe year and a half, is that I will never be the version of myself that a lot of you guys subscribe to ever again. Even if I try to, I can't. And this is something that's really bothered me, because I kind of built my brand around me as a person. My channel is called Jordan Green, and the way that I saw it, the vision that I had for it, was that my channel would kind of, okay, if I'm being honest, I didn't really have a vision, but over time, the ideal vision that I would have liked to have seen come into fruition as far as my channel goes is me just being able to document my life with all of its ups and downs, just documenting my life, not really feeling obligated to adhere to any one specific niche or subject matter. But that's not how things played out. I realize now that the vast majority of you guys subscribed to me when I was in a very unhealthy headspace. And that's not to say that I just have everything together right now. The difference is that at the time, I simply masked the fact that I didn't have everything together. Now, pretty recently, I made a video explaining how I became homeless, how I ended up living in my car, just the financial aspect of it. But I don't think I really touched too much on the aspects of my psyche that got me into this situation. Now, obviously, we have the situation with the car and everything, the BMW that I leased, but really my story goes a lot further than that. Personally, I think that a lot of this began in my youth. I was always a very insecure kid. I didn't have a good sense of self, and that's something that I'm still working on to this day. Isolation is something that I've been utilizing to the best of my ability to alleviate that issue. Nevertheless, it was much worse when I was a kid. And over time, especially once I got out of high school and I was no longer subject to a lot of the propaganda about going to college, working the 9 to 5, all of that, I began to identify with the notion, not even the actual application or experience, but the notion of materialism. And this was an idea which was deeply embedded in my subconscious mind from a very young age. If you guys read Ego Death, I think I wrote at least 1 or 2 poems talking about how I bought into, at least mentally, from a mental standpoint, at a very young age, mind you, I bought into a lot of the narratives which were being propagated through the culture, if you will, right? And if you're an African-American man, you know precisely what I'm talking about, the culture. I fell in love with the glitz and glamour. You guys have to understand, I'm 22 going on 23. I was born in 2000. So for my formative years, 2000 through 2008, 2009, that was, in my opinion, the absolute pinnacle of the bling bling era. And it really left a very profound impression on my subconscious psyche. And that resurfaced later on when I began to go through that process of self-discovery, of trying to figure out not what I want out of life, but who I am. Because how can you figure out what you want if you don't even know who you are, right? So in my case, I began to identify as the people that I saw on MTV growing up, these music videos. And a lot of this was exacerbated by some of the content that I consumed, watching people like DDG and these other lifestyle YouTubers. And I'm not putting any of the blame on these people. They are just living their lives, documenting it, whatever. But I bought into the image that they were selling, and I put my heart and soul into the notion, like I said, of that image. I fell in love with the chase. And that in and of itself is not a healthy headspace to be in. That's something that I've realized. I'm not saying that you shouldn't set goals, but to make your happiness, your self-worth, and even your self-identity contingent on the fulfillment of these goals doesn't really lead you anywhere, right? It leads you to living in a car at 22 years old and being sick being sick, sleeping in a cold car at night. Don't get me wrong, I'm grateful to even have a car, not have to sleep in a tent like some of these other people do. Some people don't even have a tent. I have seen the worst of the worst out here in LA. Talking about people sleeping on the concrete, just on the sidewalk with a blanket. Some people probably don't even have a blanket, but I digress. I realized that a big part of the reason why I'm in this situation is because I identified with this notion of materialism, right? And I'm not necessarily sure why that resonated with me at a young age. If I had to guess, it was probably just past life inertia that I had to work through. And I do feel like that definitely plays into the idea of destiny. I feel like some people, they can consume the same content or be exposed to the same variables but respond differently. And that's kind of something that I've come to terms with over time, is that it was just part of my life's journey to go through the things that I've gone through so that I can transcend that and ride that inertia into the next life. But anyways, fast forward to when I was 19 going on 20. We're talking about the beginning of 2020. This is when I am on the precipice of something great. At least that's how I saw it at the time. I'm going all in on public interviews. I'm going out to Deep Ellum, Dallas, Texas, getting my friends to come with me, staying out there till midnight, going to work the next day, 40 degrees outside, getting 200 views a video, right? All these videos are still there. You can go back and verify this for yourself. But I was putting in all this work and I saw the end goal as justifying the means to get to that end goal. I never wanted to do public interviews. I never wanted to make Tinder videos. Truthfully, I don't know that I ever even wanted to be a YouTuber, which is crazy, but I don't think I was really in alignment. As a matter of fact, I know I wasn't in alignment with my truest version, but the notion of being rich, the notion of being wealthy, and whatever came with that was powerful enough, it held enough weight in my mind to keep me going when I didn't want to do what I was doing. That was what inspired me to take my MacBook with me to work and edit on my lunch breaks and get 45 minutes of sleep, pull up to work the next day, my 15-minute break, lay the 3 chairs out, sleep on the chairs. That's what inspired me to make all of these sacrifices. And I feel like at the time, I knew I was on the precipice of something, but I needed that push. And that push was heartbreak. A lot of men can trace their material success back to heartbreak, whether it be from a woman, from their family rejecting them, maybe they were bullied in school, whatever. More often than not, when people chase wealth, it's to compensate for a lack of self-worth and some traumatic event which simply reflected that lack of self-worth back to them. And in my case, if you guys read through Soul Shock, my first book, you'll have a good understanding of how that situation affected me, right? But I think, in a sense, that book tells one side of the story, in that that was me digging deeper into the pain that I had been suppressing throughout the months. But there was another side that I feel I never truly articulated, right? And I want to do a better job of articulating that in this video. I feel like when I experienced that level of rejection, right? And really it was no different than any other rejection. It was just a girl simply wasn't ready to be in a relationship, didn't want to be with me, whatever. It all worked out in the end, but at the time it was devastating. I mean, it was absolutely emotionally jarring, and I didn't know how to process my emotions. I did not know how to process my emotions properly. I was never the type of person to cry. I was very uncomfortable with crying. As a matter of fact, I think in my later teen years, all the way into my 20th, 21st birthday, whatever, I probably cried a handful of times. A handful of times. I could count on one hand the amount of times that I cried, and most of those tears were tears of joy, right? So I wasn't somebody who was very comfortable or confident in processing my emotions. Instead, I used my emotions as fuel to motivate me to get to the bag, right? And that's the version of myself that a lot of you guys subscribe to. A lot of you guys subscribe to this very, very resentful and bitter version of Jordan Green. And at the time, of course, when you're going through it, you don't see that. You don't see that you're holding on to this resentment. But I realize now that there's a reason why I was willing to subject myself to such extreme work conditions. Granted, being a content creator, it can only be so extreme. I'm just talking to a camera, but as far as depriving myself of basic necessities for life, like sleep and food and things like that, just to get my work done, just to create content, so that I could hopefully acquire enough revenue to invest into items which I felt would make me good enough for this girl who rejected me. And it sounds crazy when you put it like that, but a lot of men are living like that. And the reason why I know that is because my energy, my frequency, the frequency that I was on at that time resonated with so many people. It resonated with a lot of people. And what I learned over time, as I first of all undertook the process of turning my trauma into a book, or really 2 books now, Soul Shock and Ego Death, and also doing therapy, doing a lot of deep introspection, and forcing myself to take breaks from working to distract myself from the pain that I was hiding from. As I began to implement these wellness practices, my work ethic began to dwindle. And I remember over time just watching as my motivation died down. And what I didn't understand at the time was that I was simply healing. I was healing, and in that healing, I was being guided back into the direction that I was supposed to be on in the first place. Because what I realize now is that this life is not supposed to feel like a grind. I used to glamorize the grind. You guys know that. If you've been subscribed to me for the past few years, you know that. I used to glamorize the grind every video. Every single video. I would talk about how I got 3 hours of sleep that night, but I had to get this video out. I'm posting every day, and I fed off of it. I fed off of it because not only was I, to my point earlier, hiding from my pain, but also in a space where you have a lot of people who resonate with your message, whether that message is positive or negative in nature, that type of behavior is rewarded. That's what YouTube is. It rewards your behavior. As long as people resonate with your message, YouTube will reward your behavior. And so I realize now, this is something that I've said in the past, I never understood why it was this way, but the times where I was making the most money on YouTube were the times where I was the most miserable. And it never made sense to me. Because like I said, I had identified with the notion of being rich. Now, granted, I wasn't rich. I would say I was young rich in a sense. I was making more money than the average person my age at the time. But I was miserable mentally. And I could not fathom why that was. I just didn't understand it. But now I do. I understand that once you do the shadow work, once you do the healing, and you process your emotions, they're no longer a viable or sustainable source of fuel for you. I can't tap into that resentment that I used to have because it's not there anymore. It's just not there. I have to tap into something else. I have to move from a space of love, or I have to subject myself to a traumatic event again, which, believe me when I tell you, I have no intention of doing. I used to look up to people like Michael Jordan and just all of these people who have this seemingly insatiable work ethic and drive and determination. And I'm not saying that these people are not accomplished in what they did or that they're even unhappy in their lives, but I don't know. None of us really know. None of us know what actually goes on inside of these people's heads. And what I realize is that a lot of times when you're at peace with yourself, you find yourself in a state of what seems to be complacency for other people, but ultimately, you're happy. You're actually happy and fulfilled in your life. And that's something that I've been trying to reconcile with the purposefulness that I've propagated on my channel up to this point. There's certain aspects of my psyche, of the persona that I had developed, that I know cannot come with me into the future. That resentment, that grind set mentality, that has to go. That has to go. That can't come with me. What can come with me, however, is the notion that when you make it a priority to use your pain to help other people as well as yourself, and you make it a priority to help other people become the best versions of themselves, whatever that means to you, whether or not you make the most money is irrelevant. You'll feel the most fulfilled. Because truthfully, your purpose is not the source of your fulfillment, but rather it's the expression of your fulfillment. When you find God, as they say, when you seek that kingdom, what you'll find is that your purpose will find you. Your purpose will fall right into your lap. And I'm realizing now that for me, my purpose is definitely more writing oriented, but who knows, there might be some other endeavor that I can't see from the current perspective that I'm at. But I know that having these conversations with myself, as well as you guys, is an integral part of me eventually transcending the perspective that I'm at right now and getting to that perspective where I can actually see what I need to see and make the moves that I need to make accordingly. I'm saying all of this to say that I will never be the version of myself that a lot of you resonated with, and maybe some of you still resonate with. I'll never be that curly hair Jordan again. I'll never be him. I can't. I cannot be him. I've tried it. No fap, all this other stuff. It just, a lot of it doesn't make sense to me. I'm not saying that these things are bad per se, but I'm realizing now that without that resentment, I'm being forced to live my life in a space where the desire for materialism is simply not present, or at the very least, it doesn't become my overarching priority, and it doesn't intrude upon my sense of self. If you feel like this video does not resonate with you at all, if you're not somebody who wants peace of mind, if you just want to spite other people and live in your ego and acquire as much power as you possibly can in lieu of freedom, by all means do that. But don't look to me to help you do that, because that's not my place anymore. It never was my place. Maybe during that chapter of my life, it was my place to do that, just to help draw people in, to help bring them to the light as well. But first I had to bring myself to the light by investing in myself, by doing therapy, by doing the shadow work, the journaling, the introspection. Moving out on my own was one of the best decisions I ever made. Financial implications aside, getting that time to just sit there with my thoughts, with nothing else but my own thoughts, and to be able to dissect my beliefs piece by piece, to be able to trace all of these different aspects of my life which I was dissatisfied with back to the very source. That is something that you cannot put a price on. It's invaluable. But with that being said, you actually can get all of this introspection, all of this insight for a very, very low price, $5.55 for a PDF copy of both of my books on my website. Soul Shock and Ego Death, PDF copies, $5.55. Go and get it, or don't. It's up to you. But just know that when I write my books are intended to take you from that space that I was in to the space that I'm getting to right now, which is a space of peace and presence and personal power, rather than the illusion of power, that scarcity-based power of trying to impose this projection of who I want people to think I am onto other people who really don't actually care. Nobody cares what car you're driving, what clothes you're wearing. That person who broke your heart definitely doesn't care. And if they do, then you probably don't need to go and get those things anyways. Or they're just not the right person to be in your life to begin with. These are all things that if I told my 20-year-old self, he wouldn't have listened. And I know some of you won't listen as well, and that's fine, but some of you will. At least one of you will. This video is going to change somebody's life. If nobody else, it'll at least change mine.